Hi, I've decided to make some videos related to living with post-traumatic stress disorder, um, chronic depression, generalized anxiety disorder, depression. There's many names for it. And if you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you're um, living with one of the same, or trying to live with one of the same, or struggling with one of the many challenges of living with this diagnosis. I've lived with this all my life. I was not diagnosed until I was about 30 years old, I guess I was. It was after the birth of my first child, who I had when I was 29. And even then, it took over a year to actually be properly diagnosed. That was 23 years ago, um, because the tools just really weren't in place. And in terms of assessing people, assessing women, it was diagnosed initially as a postpartum depression, and I was hospitalized for that for 10 days. And over the last 23 years, it's been very challenging. And what I'm trying to focus on with these videos is sharing some of my life experiences, but trying to offer some hope and trying to offer some ideas around things that helped me and things that did not help me, in hopes that I can spare other people from some of the suffering that has been very real in my life. You know, you will hear that suffering is a part of life, and it is, and there's different ways of viewing that in terms of spirituality, religion, personal philosophy. For me, one of the biggest factors in my suffering, because that is what it is suffering, and I'm sure you're here today because there's something that is causing you pain in dealing with these diagnoses. It's very real, this pain, um, from mental illness. It's very real. I'm right there with you. I get it. I cannot know exactly what your pain or suffering is, but I am 100% with you in that it is a form of suffering. And again, while people will say suffering is a part of life, and suffering builds character, and suffering is just something you have to get through in life, I don't agree with that 100%, and I will share with you why I feel that way. But I want to be realistic in offering information, and I tend to ramble because I've had a lot of things go on in my life, like you, like other people, like all of us. So what's the point of this video? I think first off, it's to introduce myself. Um, I was born in a rural area, grew up in a beautiful natural setting, was extremely blessed, lucky in this regards. And I've come to see that, again, that was a blessing, because nature, I believe, nature and being outdoors plays a huge part in our ability to be well as humans. More about that later. But I also grew up in a very chaotic, violent setting, very unpredictable. A lot of alcoholism. I witnessed a lot of very frightening things. Um, uh, Things related to the use of guns to threaten people. My mom was horribly abused by my father. Two of my older brothers were. Um, I wasn't physically hit. I was several times by my mother in order to get me to shut up when I protested about some of the violence, because I'm very intelligent. and sensitive. And I've been told that's a bad thing. It's a blessing and a curse. Perhaps you can relate to that. There were many times where I wish that I wasn't very intelligent, and that's not bragging. I am quite an intelligent person, and very sensitive, as I said, and insightful and reflective and introverted, and all those things where they've helped me in some areas of my life in terms of my ability to be a certain type of nurse and a certain type of teacher and a certain type of mother. They've also made it very challenging to have experienced those things. Um, so that was the start of my life, and as I said, my mother was anxious, so I was born anxious. I was being created in an atmosphere of anxiety. I was bathed in her cortisol, that's what I say, and my mom was pretty done and pretty tired by the time I arrived in the world. I was a surprise. I was what used to be called a Legion Party baby, and she had had 6 children before and had lost children, and had a grade 8 education and was trapped. And so that's a bit of me. Um, One thing that really helped me growing up again was nature, was being outside. I was lucky enough. Somehow I managed to have a horse for 5 years, even though that created some additional anxiety for me because the horse ended up knowing that I was anxious, and she was smart and she figured that out, and she would freak out anytime a car went by. She wouldn't do it with my mom because my mom wasn't afraid to ride. That's one thing with my mom. She'd been a hunting guide in the Chilcootins, and she was a horsewoman, and she wasn't afraid. So the horse didn't freak out with her, but the horse did freak out with me. But there were many times still I was able to ride on neighbors' fields and in the forests, and that gave me a great sense of peace and belonging. So if you can get out in nature, maybe that's something that'll come of this video, and I know that's almost impossible if you're dealing with agoraphobia. Um, so that's the start of my life, and it started a little bit of who I am. I grew up in a big family. I had a lot of family around me. Again, I was the youngest of 7 children. However, 3 of those older children were from other marriages. I grew up with the oldest because she was raised by my maternal grandparents, and so I stayed close to her. 2 other half siblings ended up in Vancouver because they ended up going with the father, who had some money and some family and some stability, and maybe that was a blessing for them. So they weren't subject to the same types of things that the 4 youngest were. So I'm not close to them. And actually, what I've seen with my life is that with this mental illness, I've lost my family. I always had problems being close to people anyway. I was very sensitive, and I don't know how you are, but depending on where my illness is at, I can barely be around people. I'm super sensitive. I can barely watch certain things on TV. I have to really regulate things. My nervous system is very sensitive, and it's been very damaged and battered. So if I can get to younger people who are dealing with this now, first off, I want to say, if I was talking to my younger self now, or then, I would say do everything you can to take care of your body in order to prevent some of the damage that does and inevitably occurs related to living with a mental illness. And especially if you are a highly sensitive, highly anxious person, which I am, don't take it for granted. Time goes by so fast. Do everything you can right now to keep your mind and your body healthy. Don't take anything for granted. I guarantee that in 10, 20, 30 years from now, you will thank me for this. Spend as much time in nature as you can. It's proven to offer so many health benefits. There's a reason we're attracted to it. There are actually studies that show the real benefits of being near trees, in a forest, near the ocean. Stay out of places where the energy is just really intrusive, fluorescent lights, lots of artificial energy, like in Walmart and um, types of stores that sell electronic equipment. Um, Learn about mindfulness and practice it. It sounds really flaky and hokey. It's not even religious based if you're worried about that, if you're a Christian and you're worried, because I identify as a Christian. And mindfulness is just a way of repeatedly being aware of being in the moment, of actually feeling that moment. And even around the trying and challenging moments of anxiety or deep depression, it's kind of like compared to labor. And I've had two babies, and I don't know where you're at with that, but the more you fight it and the more you grasp outside of yourself looking for help, the worse it is. Look inside yourself, or look to God, but stay inside yourself. And I'm not trying to be contradictory here. I don't want you to hide away from the world. And if I'm not explaining myself very well, please ask questions. But what I'm saying is to sit with the emotions. It's different from rumination where you go over and over. It's just sitting with it and letting it be and feeling it. Where are you feeling it? What's the sensation? Sit with it and stay with it. I say this to my daughter. I do have a younger daughter that I'm still raising that also struggles with anxiety. Um, so that's a really important thing. The mindfulness. Find out about it. Look up about it on YouTube. Practice it, even if it's just slowly little bits of it. Look into meditation. And again, if you think, well, that's going to interfere or that's not right, that's not godly, there's Christian meditations that you can look at. It's not about worshiping. It's about finding ways to still your mind. And don't get caught up in where, oh, I can't do that. I always think. People that'll teach you properly or proper techniques of meditation will share with you that it's the brain's job to think. You're going to think, you're going to have thoughts. And the important thing is not to beat yourself up about this, but to learn to accept those thoughts and then learn to say, okay, thinking, and then let it pass. The more you do that, the more you're just aware. It's that awareness of those thoughts instead of just letting them run rampant. The awareness. If you do it once in a 10-minute meditation, you're successful. Using your breath. You hear this all the time. With anxious people, we tend to hold our breath. We don't breathe. We hyperventilate, and it's a downward spiral into a flood of other hormones and that lead us down that dark path to a full-blown panic attack. Even right now with me, I have to remember to breathe. I have to remember to take those breaths. Dr. Weil, Weil, talks about a specific form of breathing, and I use that where you breathe in for 4, you count for 2 or 3 seconds holding it, and then you release it to a count of 8 or even longer if you need to, and you repeat this as needed. It's very effective for slowing things down. Eat properly. Like if you're a young person or even an older person, you're going to have crutches. I love certain things, chocolate, but I found that the less I eat of that type of thing, the more I pay attention, because this is where I've gotten where I just can't. I think of it is a chronic illness, and instead of being overwhelmed with that, embrace it, that it will keep you healthier physically if you embrace it. I'm not saying you can't have a piece of cheesecake or some chocolate or some chips. I'm just saying that the majority of your diet, really look at. And if you think, oh, it's so expensive to eat like that, you don't have to go totally full-blown vegan organic. And I don't believe in a vegan diet, but that's just me. I'm not here to argue. I also have issues with iron and thyroid, and so, but I look at, okay, what's the best quality that I can afford to buy? If it's frozen, fresh frozen, and you use that. If you can buy seasonally, if you can try to stay away from like cheaper forms of meat, like from Walmart and stuff, even though I know it's hard if you're poor or you're on a budget. I get that because I'm on a disability, but I'd rather eat 1 or 2 servings of quality meat a week that's more grass-fed or wild, if you can get wild meat, if you know someone that hunts. I am not against hunting. I'm not for trophy hunting. I'm totally against that, but I support humane and properly executed hunting. And if I've turned you off and you want to leave this video, I totally respect that. But if you can get past that and bear with me, that's my choice, and I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to judge. So this is just a start to tell you about my journey and to tell you about those things that I've learned, especially over the last 23 years, including how I've coped with mental breakdowns and hospitalizations, how I've coped with raising children, especially a child that ended up on the autistic spectrum while dealing with my own mental health issues, being a single parent, surviving a very nasty divorce, which I'm sure most of them are, but loneliness, isolation from friends and family, people choosing to not support you or help you or be around you, and how to deal with that. The deep sense of loneliness, that's a huge one, how I've dealt with that. So again, these videos, they do come from a place of understanding. Again, I can't know exactly how things are for you, but I do understand suffering. I do understand the stigma that's related to mental illness. I understand what it's like to feel hopeless, what it's like to feel deeply lonely. I also understand how it is to be well, and I do understand those things that have helped me and those things that have hurt me. And I hope that this video gives you some sense of where I'm coming from, and that you will return to watch some subsequent videos related to living with post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and now as I'm getting older, combining that with other health issues related to hypothyroidism, anemia. So yeah, I hope you have a peaceful day, and we'll talk to you soon.